I'm Hélène Cohen. I've been in teaching for 34 years, one way or another, and taught in a wide range of schools. I've taught in special needs schools, I've taught in dyslexia provisions, I've taught in state schools, private schools, schools where kids are very deprived, and schools where kids are very privileged. I've taught secondary, primary, and also I do some lecturing. So I've taught at all different levels. I've been a class teacher, English teacher, SENCO, and as all teachers I've been thrown into things like geography, RS. I've taught French because I have a French name. The fact that, it was luck that I can speak French, but I've taught pretty much all of it. I'm dyslexic myself. I've wondered about that for a while, assumed it was just that I was frightened to have an assessment in case it was because I was thick. I was really frightened of that. It's all in my blog. But it turns out I'm not. I am dyslexic, and that's affected a lot of my life. And I only found that out a year ago, so I'm realising a lot of that now. The positive thing about it is I've got loads and loads of strategies to support children because I've spent my life having to use strategies, and I've been analysing that and putting that in place. I also tutor and supervise on the Masters Award for SENCOs, as well as there's some leadership ones, MPQ and things like that. That has actually made me very aware of what it's like for other SENCOs in different schools. So I'm actually much more, my experience is beyond my personal experience now because I'm constantly reading other people's experience, and that makes a huge difference. I'm also a doctoral researcher, nearing the end. I've got through my Viva and I've just got to resubmit, and it's like scary stuff. But that was on inspection and the effect that has on teachers, the emotional effect, and I compared the state and independent sector. Those things had led me to realise that the biggest issue, as I see it, is that there's a mismatch between policy and practice, whether that be regarding special needs or inspection. The policies out there are not the problem. The policies are fine, by and large. They're always being changed, tweaked, whatever. The problem is that they are underfunded, and the practice does not necessarily reflect the policy. So there's huge issues there. With inspection, it's changing. There was a reflection. The data-led stuff meant that you had data-driven policy, as in inspection was all about you inspect the data first, and therefore schools became data-driven, and that became the main focus, which was a real issue, because what then happens is there's a mismatch between the reason people get into education and what they have to do on a day-to-day basis. In my research, I had several people talking about the children who they had in their class having abilities that were low, and they say like they're low, but they have to achieve the same as somebody else. And I had somebody explaining how children would come to school who hadn't been fed, they didn't have correct clothing, their uniform wasn't going to get washed till next week, they might have come from abusive homes, but they've got to achieve the same as any other child. And there's this total mismatch between what's faced on in the classroom and what's happening according to policy, and these things are just not taken into account. So that's happening with inspection, as I say, with the data-driven thing, but also with special needs, which is my main area in terms of my practice as opposed to my research. The policies, as I say, are there. If you go back 40 years, you've got the Warnock Report, where it talks for the first time properly about special educational needs. It talks then about teachers needing to be trained to support children with special educational needs, and how there needs to be inclusion. It shouldn't just be about take the child away, put them in another place, put them into some institution. It should be, they can be educated anywhere. The reality of that is not necessarily the case. Now, okay, that's 40 years ago. Since then, we've had 3 codes of practice. We now have a situation where you're supposed to have wraparound care, as it were, from 0 to 25. with EHCPs, Education, Health and Care Plans. You also have the Equality Act. So there are lots of things in place from the policy point of view that tell us that the reality that people face in school should be great, it should be fine. But that's not what's happening. And there's two main reasons. One is funding, and that is the biggest thing. It sort of underpins absolutely everything. So there isn't the money in schools. There isn't the money for TAs. There isn't the money for actual resources, and resources matter. You get somebody who's got ADHD and a simple thing like a wedge-shaped cushion for them to sit on that's all bobbly can actually help calm them down. But they cost sort of £25 each. So that's a funding issue. You've got so many sensory resources out there. They are expensive. You could have amazing sensory playgrounds. They cost thousands of pounds that schools don't have because schools are still trying to find the money to pay their basic teachers. There's been reports of schools where they don't have the money for toilet rolls. So they're not going to find the money for these wonderful, wonderful spaces. It also comes into the CPD, the Continual Professional Development of Teachers. It's cheaper to send one person away on a course and then have an inset where that person then tells everybody about it, which means one person has heard it from the expert. If you get all the teachers trained, they are more able to they're more equipped, they're more able to deal with what they're facing in the classroom. They will understand that a label isn't just the superficial headline of the label, it's an individual person and there are different aspects and those different aspects need to be addressed. You've also, I'm seeing this not just, obviously articles everywhere, reading it all the time, but because of my role as a tutor for the SENCOs on the NASCO award, SENCO, one of the things they have to do is they have to write a reflective piece about their year. And they are without fail saying, I read this, I applied this, I learned this, it was amazing, I've discovered this, I've discovered that. However, but when it came to school, I couldn't be freed up from the timetable to actually put in all these wonderful interventions that I'd actually read up about and researched and knew would support the child, but I couldn't be taken out of the class to do it. I didn't have the time to train up a TA to do it. There just weren't the resources to deliver it. So there's that side of it. You've also got the fact that they will say things like, we've got certain external agencies we can call in. Some of them are free. The NHS ones are free. That's wonderful. Speech and language, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant service. Speech and language covers so many areas of special needs. It's something which, if you can get a good speech and language specialist in your school and you get a chance to discuss things with them, loads of strategies, fantastic. However, the waiting list for these services, bit of a postcode lottery, but even in the best areas, the waiting list is ridiculous. So in the poorest areas where you have more need, the waiting lists are longer, and therefore you're not getting that support. Especially something like speech and language, the earlier it's in place, it's actually, if you like, it's turning your finances on its head. It's what you would not do in your own home. In your own home, you wouldn't keep, if you could avoid it, drip feeding little bits of money and then realise you've actually spent so much more over time. You would very early on say, you know what, if I stop it leaking now, I won't have to replace the ceiling. What we're doing in education is we're plugging little holes and eventually the ceiling's going to come down. And that's exactly what's happening in education everywhere. Every single student, they're all SENCOs and they're all saying the same thing. We don't have the money to put in the interventions. Part of that goes back to what I said before about inspection, because the training is being put into getting your data up. And that is ignoring what real progress is. Progress is being measured by this arbitrary, artificial testing that doesn't reflect progress in terms of a child's life. So if you've got a child who couldn't sit still for 5 seconds, let alone 5 minutes, who just kept shouting out in class, not just affecting their education, but all of those around them, and you've managed to get that child to come in, sit down, listen, work out what you want, and give an answer and wait their turn. That is progress, but it's not going to be measured on any single measurement that is taken into account anywhere. So it gets disregarded. So we've got this mismatch. There's policies there. Oh, we can put this in place. Oh, we have to be mindful of all the needs. We add to that all the time. We're now adding mental health. We as teachers have to be mindful of mental health. We have to pick up on where there are mental health issues. So we do that. Teachers have been doing that anyway, forever. They then need to make a referral, either themselves or through the GP. The referral goes to something called CAMHS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health. They then have a waiting list, which can be a year and a half. If you're lucky, it's a mere 6 months. It may get escalated if you actually think the person is in immediate physical danger. But even then, there's no guarantee. So you've got your child who's potentially ADHD. They need to be referred to CAMHS as part of the whole diagnosis process, but they have to wait for 9 months. During those 9 months, the teachers are going to keep going on and on about how naughty that child is, and that child is then going to perceive themselves as naughty. The behaviour is going to get worse, and it's a downward spiral. And if we put the funding in earlier, that could be sorted.